Hello everybody and welcome back to the Mr. Matthew Does Coding YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the client and the server. And we're going to be talking about what each of them does and how they interact with each other. So let me define the server first. The server is the entire game, in the Roblox context, it's the entire game that the players reside in and everything that gets done that is outside of the player's computer. And what do I mean by that? Well, for things like these here, these are all server-side things. With like this model, that's server-side, this dummy is server-side, all that is server-side stuff. So a server, or like a big fancy computer over in the Roblox headquarters, is handling all this information, and the client is handling the rendering, what you see on the screen, but the actual data of these things is stored in Roblox servers or wherever the server of a game is being stored in. So for server scripts will affect every single player no matter what you do. It's going to change information that happens in the headquarters, not just stuff that happens on the player's computer. So I'm going to give an example real quick. I'm going to insert a server script into here, and I'll just, call it example. And we're going to create in here a new instance instance.new part, okay? And we're gonna set part.parent to be workspace, and then its position is going to be just at like 0, 10, 0, so it's a little bit above the base plate. And boom, we've just done something on the server side. We've created a part on the server, so the computer that's handling all this in the Roblox headquarters is going to run this code when it's told to, and it's going to process all this information and store this data in those computers, and then it's going to map all that stuff to the client so it can be rendered. So server-side part, server-side everything, and it's going to appear on all the players' screens. So outside of code, we have some storage. Right here, there's the ServerStorage service. So, as the name implies, it's stuff that is stored on the server. So that computer, way off somewhere, is storing and processing all this stuff that's going to be used later. And the client cannot access this, by the way. Server storage is only accessible via server means, so your computer is not going to be able to look inside the server storage and get stuff or add stuff to it. Now let's talk about the client, because the client has a couple of special things about it that are really unique to it, and it's what makes games do some of the things that they do, which are player specific. Like, I'll give an example. In Bee Swarm Simulator, you need a certain amount of bees to unlock certain areas in the game, but when you collect that amount, it opens for you, but somebody that doesn't have, let's say, the 25 bees that they need to get into a zone, it won't open for them. That's an example of the client doing something. Now, there's a couple of client-specific services, which are StarterGUI. There's Starter Player. The Starter Player, well, I mean, it does have some server-side things, but it's all mapped to the player, which is on the client side. Let me talk about the GUIs for a little bit. So, GUIs are all handled on the client side. It's a client-rendered thing since it's being put onto the player's screen. It's not a physical object in space. So, like, if I got a screen GUI and then I got a frame. This is a client-side object. And I can do certain things with this via what's called a local script, and it'll only change things on my end and not on everybody else's end, unless specified, and I'll get to that later. So now that we have that whole thing established, I'm going to show you a cool application of local scripts and just stuff you can do on the client. So in the workspace, actually no, not in the workspace, because local scripts will not run in the workspace. They need to be parented to something specific. Like if I hover over local script, it gives me all of the things that the local script will run under when it's parented to it. It'll run when it's parented to the backpack of a player, its character model, its GUIs, its player scripts, or the ReplicatedFirst service. The ReplicatedFirst service is a unique service which will be it'll be the main priority of things that are mapped to the client. So if you want to make like a loading screen for the game, ReplicatedFirst would probably be the place that you would store that, so that it's the very first thing that gets loaded. It takes priority when the game is loading up. So I'm going to put a local script into our starter player scripts just to make this easier. What this does when you put in this folder is that when you run the game, this script is going to get copied and put into the player, which is held inside the player's service. Now, what I'm going to do in this code is very simple. I'm going to take a part like this, and I'm going to change some properties about it on that client script. So we're going to call this client part, and right now it's just regular boring old cube, right? And what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to raise it up and I'm going to anchor it to give a more exaggerated example. So we have this floating cube here, it's anchored, all that good stuff. What we're going to do is reference this real quick. Client part equals workspace, wait for child, client part. And now let's change the properties about it. Let's change its shape to be enum.partType ball, not sphere. We'll change its color to be color3.new, and we'll make it a nice bright orange. And finally, I'm going to set its anchored property to be false. Now let's boot up the game. And what you'll see is that all that stuff is going to get applied to our part, but when we switch to the server, it's not going to look like that. Okay, our ball hasn't been unanchored. That's kind of weird. I just don't think that it's working correctly right now. But it did unanchor it. And you'll see that if I click on this button next to the stop button, you get to switch between the client and the server. So it essentially detaches the camera, and now you're on the server. And you see that green box. And look at that. It's still the exact same. And you just unanchored it. I think that the anchored property might only work on the server and not the client, because it worked just now on the server, but not the client. So I guess that happened. Now let's do one more cool example, which is that you can not only change properties of parts on the client, but you can also create parts on the client. So let me show you. I'm going to replace this with instance.new part, and then I'm going to say client part.parent equals workspace, client part.position is going to equal vector3.new, 0, comma 10, comma 0, and I'm going to set its anchored property to true so that it doesn't go flying away. Now let's hit play, and we'll see that we have an orange ball again, but if I go on the server, it's not going to be there. There we go. That tiny little thing is our client part. And when you create new instances, it has that weird stud thing on it, so you would have to specify a material so that doesn't happen. But if I go and switch to the server, would you look at that? It's not there. Pretty cool, huh? Now, you can do things on the client side, and you can do things on the server side, but how would you actually have the server and the client be able to interact with each other? Well, that's where two things come in. We have remote events, and we have replicated storage. I'm going to go over replicated storage first. Hey, editor, me here. So my explanation of replicated storage was really bad, so I'm going to re-explain it here. The replicated storage is storage that is replicated to the server and the client. And it's useful because the other storage services are either server-specific or they're client-specific. ReplicatedFirst is client-specific, and ServerStorage is server-specific, but replicated storage is storage that can be accessed by both the client and the server, so that's why it's useful in this context. The replicated storage most times is used for two purposes. It's to store values, like the one I just showed there, Boolean values, number values, etc. And it's used to store remote events, since they're a way to communicate between the client and server as well. So it kind of just makes sense to put them in here. I'm going to create a remote event real quick, and I'm going to call it example event. And what this is going to do is, if you don't know what remote events are already, a script can get that remote event as a variable, and then it can fire it. That's the term that's used in the code. You fire the remote event, and then another script can be listening for that event to go off. And when it does, it's going to do something like run a function. So let me explain how that would work real quick. I have actually this from a tutorial, summon cubes. I'm going to use something kind of like that to explain this. So I'm going to create a platform, a raised platform. I'll anchor it, and I'll just make it look nice, color it purple. And when we step on this purple part, what we want to do is we'll have a GUI pop up on the screen. It's very basic, but it's just an example to show you how the server and the client can interact with each other. So in here, this is going to be GUI show. I'm going to add in a script, and we're going to just write out some code for a touched event real quick. Okay, this is the code, and it just detects when it's touched. If it's a player, then we're going to get this player variable, which is just get player from character, and we're going to fire the example event to that player. Now, when you're just firing to one client or one player, then you need to put in here the argument for that player. But if you did fire all clients, you don't need that because it's just doing it to all of the clients. But you need to do that so it knows what client are we going to. And now we can set up that little GUI. So I'm going to get just a text label real quick, and I'll size it up, and I'll put the text on here and label it. Alright. And now we can add in a local script to here, and we can start writing some code for it. So I'm going to reference the text as script.parent, and I'm going to reference our example event as game.replicatedStorage.example event, and then we're going to listen for the example event. So example event.onClientEvent : connect function. And then what we're going to do is just text.visible equals true. And that should be all we need. And let me really quick take the visibility off of it. And now, when we step on that part, it should have that text label appear on our screen. But it's only going to appear on our screen. It's kind of hard to show this when I'm the only player in the game. But if I did this... My bad, there was an error in the code that I put. It's actually supposed to be game.players : get player from character hit.parent. Alright, now it should work correctly. There we go. We got the little text on our screen. Woohoo! So that's essentially it with the client and the server. Everything that you would basically need to know. It's just, the basics of how the server works and the client works and how they work together to get certain tasks done. So, hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe if you did. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. And if you'd like to keep up with updates about the YouTube channel and how my game The Valley is going, then you can join my Discord server, which I'll link in the description below. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.